Welcome, my MTG friends, zealots. Let's do another Commander deck tech. This is a subscriber requested deck tech. Let's jump in. This is the Mimeoplasm, and this is a legendary creature ooze. As the Mimeoplasm enters the battlefield, you may exile 2 creature cards from graveyards. If you do, it enters the battlefield as a copy of one of those cards with a number of additional 1/1 counters on it equal to the power of the other card. So we're taking this in a different direction. Instead of doing +1/+1 counter shenanigans and doubling season and all of that kind of craziness, we're actually going to be doing more of a mill type build, as well as some control and protection, and really utilize getting cards into our opponent's graveyard so that we can grab some choice spicy creatures and make the Mimeoplasm a really giant force to be reckoned with. So that's the build we're going after here. Let's jump into the different sections of this build. And as usual, if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the alerts. Moving on. So let's talk about the packages like we do in every Commander deck tech. We got the typical draw package. We have a huge mill package in here, although this isn't just specifically about milling. There is a purpose to this. However, there is some alt-win conditions where we could mill our opponents to death as well, just depending on how the board state is and how your game progresses. We have a good amount of removal, spot removal and mass removal. We have Graveyard Shenanagins going on, land package, ramp, protection. We actually are going to run some Monarch cards because they fit nicely into this build. And then I believe there's some control that we have as well. Because we have blue in our commander, we're going to be running a good amount of control as well. And then, as in all, if not most all of our commander deck techs, we have the maybe board, sideboard for budgetary considerations and swaps, just depending on if you want to tweak it here or there. So let us jump into the first section, which is draw. And because we're in blue, we have a good starter here with Consecrated Sphinx. It's a 6-drop, 4/6 flyer. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Damia, Sage of Stone in our commander colors. It's got Death Touch, then it's got the Necropotence skip your draw step mechanic in here. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have fewer than 7 cards in hand, draw cards equal to the difference. So it's not exactly a Necropotence in a body, but it is interesting, and I like how this can refill your hand by just having it on the board. Demonic Tutor, the old school tutor, you put it into your hand from your library. Mystical Tutor, you grab an instant sorcery, put it at the top of your library. Now this is serving a couple of different mechanics here, the mill mechanic and draw mechanic, and this is Patient Rebuilding. It's a 5-drop enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, target opponent puts the top 3 cards into their graveyard, and then we draw a card for each land that is put in the graveyard. Prime Speaker Zagana. It is in green and blue colors. It's a Merfolk Wizard. It enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it, where X is the greatest power among other creatures you control. And when Prime Speaker Zagana enters the battlefield, draw cards equal to its power. So this isn't necessarily about us putting a bunch of beefy creatures on and then levering the crap out of this. It's more just having a creature out there so that we can lever this to draw into our hand. Great, cool, interesting card. Probably fairly swappable depending on if you have a card that you really want to shoehorn into this build. You can certainly pull this out and put something else in. Rhystic Study. Yep, we're running it because we're in blue. Of course, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. Worldly Tutor puts it on top of your library, a creature. All right, we are into the graveyard section. So because we are going to be milling our opponents in a very strategic fashion, we have some graveyard play so we can go pick out those creatures and control them and make them work for us, including the commander, of course. So we got Animate Dead, which is basically just a really long-winded version of Reanimate. You grab a creature out of a graveyard, and then you put a -1 power counter on it. Deathrite Shaman. This is in here for the graveyard play aspect. It's more of a protection piece for us because it's going to allow us to exile cards out of our opponent's graveyards if we're playing into their mechanics. So if they want to be playing out of the graveyard, this is just a stopgap measure to be able to go exile some of those very specific cards if we need to. Journey to Eternity. This is a nice little flip card. Enchant creature you control. Whenever enchanted creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control. So we get to reanimate our creature in essence. And then on top of that, we get to flip it and put it onto the battlefield, which can tap for a color and then also tap for 5 and reanimate a creature out of a graveyard. So it is a dual function, very interesting, cool card for this build. Lord of Extinction. I wonder what kind of voice I should be using, but that's probably not it. So I got nothing. I got nothing, folks. All right, Lord of Extinction. It's a 5-drop. It gets beefy depending on how many cards are in all graveyards. So let's read this very specifically. Lord of Extinction's power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in all graveyards. This is going to get really, really big as the game progresses. So this is something that is going to have to be dealt with by your opponents for sure. All right, Necrotic Ooze. Very interesting whenever you have things being dumped into your opponent's graveyards. As long as Necrotic Ooze is on the battlefield, it has all activated abilities of all creature cards in all graveyards. Wow, what a versatile card. So you don't exactly know what's going to be coming out of your opponent's hand, but you're going to definitely have some of those cards that end up in the graveyard that are going to have activated abilities that this is going to lever very nicely indeed. Reanimate, you know, the old school reanimate. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. So, you know, for a 1-drop, this is just an amazing card to pull things out of your opponent's graveyard or even your own graveyard, depending on the situation. Sheoldred Whispering One. It is a little spendy, but it is very powerful. It's a 7-drop legendary praetor with Swamp Walk. I love that it has Swamp Walk. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from graveyard to this battlefield. To the battlefield. Blah, blah. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. If you can keep this thing alive, the game is going to really start swinging in your direction. Oh, yes. Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. Oh, it does so many things. It does so many things that it keeps getting banned all over the place, but not in Commander. When Uro enters battlefield, sacrifice unless it escapes. And then when it does, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Oh, my goodness. And then, of course, when it attacks, you also get 3 life and draw a card. And, oh, this thing, it just does so many craziness. And then it also has Escape, which really is going to help us as well to keep getting us some draw going on and get us more lands if we need, etc., etc., etc. Uro's Titans of Nature's Wrath. Yes, it is a fantastic card in green-blue. All right, we should be in ramp now. Arcane Signet. Yep, run it. Birds of Paradise, because we're running more than 1, 2, or 3 colors. Well, we're running 3. So, yep, we're going to run Bird of Paradise. Dimir Signet. Yep. Elves of the Deep Shadow, some mana fixing, mana dork. A few mana dorks in here to really ramp up real quick. And then we have Hull Breacher, which kind of does a couple things. It's so nice out of Commander Legends. Not only can we stop our opponents from drawing additional cards when they attempt to do so, we get a treasure token instead. Very powerful, very cool card. Another mana dork, of course, for green. Oracle of Muldiah, a nice staple in green. You can play an additional land each turn, and you can play with the top card of your library revealed and play a land off the top of your library. Soul Ring. Yes, we're going to run a Soul Ring. Now, there's one you might not be super familiar with. Wow, I almost said familiar in a very strange way, but I didn't. Or did I? I'm not sure. Collective Restraint. This one is very interesting. It is a 4-drop. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays X for each creature attacking you, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. So we are running a good amount of basic lands. So this is another stopgap measure to keep the board under control and to keep somebody that's going wide from going too hard, too quick. We're also running another one, Propaganda. So this is just another iteration of that, and we'll get to Propaganda in a second. Fierce Guardianship. Yes, if you have a commander, this spell costs nothing, or it costs 3, which ain't bad either. Counter target non-creature spell. Force of Negation, similar ilk, very cool card. It's a 3-drop. If it's not your turn, you can exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. So in an emergency, in a pinch, you can play it for nothing. Counter target non-creature spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile instead of putting it into the graveyard. Hostage Taker. Oh man, we got a little bit of control. This one is super janky. When Hostage Taker enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature until Hostage Taker leaves the battlefield. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. So not only can you snake a card from him, then you can also play it. I think that's pretty darn funny. All right, Mana Drain. Yep, we know what this does. Counter target spell at the beginning of your next main phase. Add an amount of colorless equal to the spell's converted mana cost. Now, of course, if you don't have some of these more pricey counter spells, just run counterspell in different iterations. Absolutely. You don't have to be running these. All right, in terms of control, we have the black version of Hull Breacher that does something a little different, but out of Commander Legends as well. And those were probably the 2 most impressive cards out of Commander Legends, I remember, is Hull Breacher and this Opposition Agent. Opposition Agent, you in essence, you gain control of an opponent's turn where they are tutoring for a card. So not only do you take control of that, you get to choose which card or cards to tutor, and then you get to exile them and play them at your leisure for the remainder of the game, whether or not Opposition Agent is on the field or not. Very powerful card. I think this is going to be a staple in Commander for a long time. And like I was saying, Propaganda, basically it's like a prison in blue. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. Whew, yeah. I mean, we want to slow down the board state. We want to keep people from attacking us while we are milling them to death, taking over their creatures, and really causing havoc. It's icky, and it's awesome. Swan Song, counter target enchantment, instant, or sorcery spell. Its controller creates a 2/2 blue bird creature token with flying. What's the greatest about this card is it costs you a measly 1 to do, and it's an instant. Thieving Skydiver. I love this card, and I have not seen very many people playing it, but it really is powerful, especially for stealing like mana rocks and those kinds of things. Kicker X. X can't be 0. Not a problem. Whenever Thieving Skydiver enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, gain control of target artifact with converted mana cost X or less. If that artifact is an equipment, attach it to Thieving Skydiver. So we can thieve mana rocks, we can thieve equipments like swords and stuff. I mean, this thing is so versatile, and it's a flyer as well. So very nice indeed. All right, we are in the mill section. So we've gone pretty heavy into the mill. However, we haven't done it so that this is a mill specific deck build. This is more about milling so that we can grab them with our commander or with reanimation spells. But if the board is in a certain state, we can certainly get a win condition by milling our opponents. Absolutely. Because a lot of these mill cards are targeting all of our opponents, not just one. So that's pretty cool. All right. Altar of the Brood. It's a 1-drop, super powerful in milling. If you are building a mill-specific deck, this one is definitely an include. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his/her graveyard. Archive Trap. This will cost you nothing if your opponent goes and tutors for a card. So that's one of the parts of this card. The other is that they mill the top 13 cards of their library. It does go after one specific opponent. So just keep that in mind. Now this one is a super janky card. I believe I'm going to do a deck tech on Bruvac for a couple reasons. One, I got it in cracking a pack and jumpstart, and two, it's just that powerful in milling. But it does require mono blue if he's your commander. All right, moving on because this is not our commander. All right, if an opponent would mill one or more cards, they mill twice that many cards instead. What? Yes, this card exists. Yes, this card exists. Consuming Aberration, 5-drop. It's star/star. Consuming Aberration's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your opponent's, as in plural, graveyards. Whenever you cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals a land card, then puts those cards into his or her graveyard. Now this targets one opponent, but it gets bigger and bigger based off of all of the opponent's graveyards. Fraying Sanity, oh, super gross card. I love it. Enchant player, so it's one player. At the beginning of each end step, enchanted player puts the top X card of his or her library into his or her graveyard, where X is the number of cards put into that graveyard for anywhere this turn. So if you got one of your opponents that's more dangerous than the rest, you definitely put Fraying Sanity on him and try to get him or her out of the game as quickly as possible. Garunda, Doom of Depths, one of those companions that we're just streamlining into the 99 cards. It is when Garunda enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. Put a creature card from an even converted mana cost from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control. So we're going to most likely have a lot of cards to choose from, and we get to snake a spicy one and gain control of it. I like this card in a mill setting. Maddening Cacophony. Me loveth this card because it targets all of your opponents. For a 2-drop, each opponent mills 8 cards, but you can kick it for an additional 4, and if that happens, they dump half of their library rounded up. Half, folks. Half. Half. Yep, that's right. Half. All right, Mind Funeral. It's a 3-drop. Target opponent reveals cards from the top of his or her library until 4 land cards are revealed. That player puts all cards revealed this way into his or her graveyard. So this actually could mill somebody to death depending on if they have enough lands left in their deck. But it's really going to do well to start getting rid of some of their library. Mind Crank. Whenever an opponent loses life, that player puts that many cards from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Now notice it says whenever an opponent loses life. So that can be from your other opponents having them lose life as well. It doesn't have to be life specifically from you, which is very tasty, very spicy. Necromaster Dragon, 5-drop, 4/4 flyer. Those are decent stats just by themselves, but oh wait, there's more. Whenever Necromaster Dragon deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2. If you do, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield, and each opponent puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Remember the days when cards did like one thing, maybe 2? Nowadays it's like, oh, it does 3 and 4, 5 things. Whew. Well, that's of no consequence because you know what? We really like the fact that this mills cards. So that's why we have it in there. Nemesis of Reason, 5-drop, 3/7 Leviathan Horror. Whenever Nemesis of Reason attacks, defending player puts the top 10 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Whew, man. I mean, it is a 5-drop, but man, it's got a big booty. A 3/7. Wow. So it's going to be hard to get rid of. Psychic Corrosion for 3 enchantment. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. Ooh, that is millalicious for sure. Yes, indeed. And we have enough going on where we're not just all mill and not protection. I mean, we have a lot of protection and we have creatures that we can have out on the board. So milling is just almost like a byproduct to the deck being built around this commander. I digress. Sire of Stagnation for 6 in blue-black. It's devoid, which means it has no color, which whatever. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of his or her library and you draw 2 cards. So yes, I know this doesn't dump it into their graveyard, which is what we're ultimately wanting, but it has the milling capability as well as drawing us additional cards. Thus, it is in here. Now, this is actually a VIP in this kind of a build where we're dealing with dumping things into the graveyard. It is Sir Conrad. It is a legendary human knight. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere, which means our milling mechanics work, then you do 1 damage to each opponent. Each opponent. And then it's got this extra bonus of for 1 colorless black, each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. This is nasty once we get going, and I like it. I like it a lot. Thank you, Throne of Eldraine. All right, we're going to blast through the land package relatively quickly. This is the most swappable, like we say, in all of the deck techs. You can certainly swap in some basic lands or dual lands that come in tapped. We're running some of the more spendy versions and iterations of these lands. So we got the pathways in our colors of the commander. We have the dual lands in the colors of our commander and the shock lands in the colors of our commander. And then we also have a fair amount of basics, 6 in each, I believe. And then we are running a few fetch lands as well. So, yep, fetch land. And then we have the fun ones where if you have more than 1 opponent, you have dual lands that don't come in tapped. Of course, if you're playing 1v1, you can certainly swap these out for basic lands or whatever else shoots your fancy. More dual lands, the originals. If you have them, of course, run them. If you don't, swap them. Absolute demondo, swap them out. And then more of these with more than 1 opponent. Or actually, it's 2 or more opponents. You get to bring this in untapped. So, if you know you're going to be playing against just 1 person, make sure you swap these out. More Fetchersons and shock lands. And then we are actually running the Triome in our commander colors. I just really like the Triomes. All right, let's do the removal section. Abrupt Decay, a great staple in Golgari. Can't be countered. Destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. And then we have a staple in Golgari, which is Assassin's Trophy. Destroys a permanent, which can include a land, and then they get a basic land for their troubles. Cyclonic Rift. Oh, somebody's got to put a comment in there because I'm not going to edit that out. Cyclonic Rift. It's a 2-drop with overload of 7. You know, you get to put all the non-land permanents of your opponents into their hand. Oh, this is such a gross card. I love it. Damnation. Mass removal. Yes, sir. Deadly Rollick. I see myself putting this in like every black deck I have. It is just that cool and that good, and that's probably why it keeps creeping up in price. If you control a commander, you may cast this without paying its mana cost and the exile target creature. Again, this isn't putting it into their graveyard. This is more of a reset button, a fix if we need it, or if something that's super sticky, that has indestructible, etc., etc. That's what Deadly Rollick is there for. All right, we got a little bit more removal, this time in the form of an Elder Dragon. Flying Death Toucher. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature or planeswalker for as long as you control Dragon Silumgar. All right, so we have another Cyclonic Rift type card. Evacuation. Return all creatures to their owner's hands. It's not quite as awesome as Cyclonic Rift, but it is definitely going to allow us a few extra turns to keep milling and keep doing our shenanigans we have in this build. Force of Vigor! Yes, this one is pretty cool for removal if we need it. If it's not your turn, you can exile a green card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. And for a straight up 4, you can destroy up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. I need not say more. Oh, Oko. I should probably make a song about this card. Super janky. It's got very cool removal and theft abilities. You know, Oko. You can create a food, which, yeah, whatever. But its +1 is really what's pretty cool. You can make it lose its abilities and create an elk. And then its ultimate is pretty darn crazy too. So this is probably a fairly swappable card, just depending on what you're trying to do. But it's got a nice little mechanic of the +1. And it's very difficult to deal with, especially early on. And then, of course, we got Reclamation Sage. It enters the battlefield and you can destroy a target artifact or enchantment. Toxic Deluge. I mean, yeah, what a great black removal spell. As an additional cost to cast this, you pay X life. I mean, we're not running a life gain deck, so you're going to be needing to be careful with how you play this. But, I mean, all creatures get -X until end of turn. I mean, what a nasty, nasty reset button. All right, now we have the courts, which play very nicely right into our deck build. Whenever you're the Monarch, you get to utilize what this has. So when Court of Ambition enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. So that's groovy. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 3 life unless they discard a card. If you're the Monarch instead, each opponent loses 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. So we like that we're having the graveyard get filled with Court of Ambition. Court of Bounty is another nice one. It allows us to become the Monarch again. And if you have a couple of these courts out, oh, they feed off of each other. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you're the Monarch instead, you may put a creature or land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So we have a lot of enter the battlefield mechanics on a lot of our creatures. So that will definitely get utilized. Court of Cunning, which is the big one that we want. You could easily swap out the other 2 courts if you so desired, but this one should certainly stay in with these kinds of mechanics. Court of Cunning enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, any number of target players each mill 2 cards. If you're the Monarch, each of those players mills 10. 10! That's right, 10. Holy shnikes, 10. That's disgusting. And again, I love it. All right, a few protection pieces. We got Heroic Intervention to protect those courts and to protect our other board state. Permits you control, gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Lightning Greaves to protect our commander. Swift Boots to also protect our commander. And or the boots and the greaves could protect something we have stolen out of an opponent's graveyard for sure. For surezies. And that brings us, yes, again, full circle to the Mimeoplasm. Thanks for checking it out. This is, again, not one where we're doing +1/+1 counters. I think that's been done to death. This is a different take on it. A very fun deck to play. You're not going to be making friends playing this deck, but, you know, I mean, as long as your opponents are okay with this kind of jank, you should be all right. I mean, it's by no means a CEDH deck or anything, but it is definitely competitive and it will serve you well. All right, thanks for tuning in. Check out our other episodes. Woo! Almost got tongue-tied there. And we'll catch you later.